Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we'll be looking at a chapter from a memoir. And it's this really incredible story about family and resilience. And
Mm.
there's this childhood promise that gets put to the test when a medical emergency hits.
Yeah, what's interesting is how this story starts out.
Hmm.
You know, it's the 1990s, and we have this family, and get this, they're actually voting as a family on whether or not to move to Brussels.
Wow, can you imagine having that kind of say as a kid?
I know, right? The memoir is written from the 12-year-old daughter's perspective, and she's clearly thrilled about the moves.
Yeah.
But even with all the excitement, there's this one little detail that stands out.
Oh.
She sheds a single tear as they leave, like just one tear.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, it's such a small detail, but it really foreshadows all the emotional ups and downs that are coming later in the story. It's like this subtle hint that this whole adventure might not be all smooth sailing.
Right, right. So fast forward a few years, 3 years to be exact, and the family is kind of scattered, right? The older brother is away at boarding school back in the U.S. The older sister, Dina, is at Georgia Tech,
Uh,
and the parents and the two youngest kids are still in Brussels when things take a turn. A medical emergency hits.
and being separated like that, it adds this whole other layer to the story, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just dealing with a medical crisis, but also being so far apart at such a critical time.
Yeah.
Studies have actually shown that being physically distant during times of crisis can make those feelings of helplessness and anxiety even worse.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's like this double whammy.
So in the memoir, we see how urgent everything is. Frantic phone calls are being made, and the company is quick to authorize flights for the siblings to get back to Brussels.
That detail about the flights, it's easy to overlook,
Yeah.
but I think it actually speaks volumes about the family's resources,
Mm.
and their connections. Remember, this is the 1990s, way before the internet made things so much easier.
Oh, wow.
Arranging last-minute international flights back then, it was no easy feat.
Definitely not.
It really suggests that they had a certain level of privilege that most people wouldn't have had access to back then.
It really makes you think, how would things have been different for a family without those resources?
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that even in a story as personal as this one, there are always these bigger societal and economic factors at play.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So Dina, the older sister who's at Georgia Tech, finds herself on this, what they called back then, a ferry flight.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine? You're 18 years old, you're alone on a plane with just the pilots and a stewardess
Yeah.
racing across the Atlantic, and you don't even know if you'll see your younger sister alive again.
And it's not just the travel and the logistics she's dealing with, right? She's probably experiencing what we call anticipatory grief.
Oh, I've heard of that.
It's this psychological state where you actually start to grieve a potential loss before it even happens.
Wow.
Think about the emotional toll that takes, especially for someone so young.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it's in this incredibly intense emotional state that Dina remembers a childhood pact that she made with her sister. And get this, the pact is actually tied to a song they heard on the radio.
This pact that they made years ago, just casually in the backseat of their car,
Right.
it suddenly becomes so important, so real. It really shows how these seemingly small, insignificant moments from our childhood can take on such deep meaning later on in life.
Yeah, absolutely. The author really takes her time describing that memory. The song on the radio, the way it made them feel, the actual promise they made.
But it's interesting. She never actually reveals the name of the song.
Oh, you're right.
It's like this hidden piece of the puzzle, and you can't help but wonder, what song could possibly hold that much weight for these sisters?
It's true. It really makes you think back to songs that have that kind of personal significance in your own life, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And another thing, this was before the internet, right?
Oh.
So Dina couldn't just Google the lyrics or anything.
She's totally on her own.
She's on this 9-hour flight, desperately trying to remember this song just from memory.
That detail about no internet, I think it really adds to the tension.
Yeah.
It emphasizes how isolated she is,
Right.
that internal struggle she's going through.
Right, right.
It's almost like a miniature version of the whole story, right?
Uh-huh.
Feeling alone, facing this seemingly impossible challenge.
It is, and here's the amazing part. Despite all the stress, all the pressure, she actually remembers the song.
It's incredible, isn't it? Makes you think about how music can unlock these deep memories.
It really does.
There's obviously this powerful connection between music and our emotions.
Yeah.
And in this case, it could be what allows her to keep this childhood promise.
And the pact itself, this promise between two young sisters, it still stands to this day.
Wow, that's powerful.
It really shows how strong those childhood bonds can be, you know? Even when they're tested by something as serious as a potential loss, the connection remains. The chapter ends with the family all together again, reunited at the hospital, but they're anxiously waiting, not knowing what's going to happen with the medical crisis.
Yeah.
You can really feel the tension.
That image of them all waiting together as a family is so powerful, isn't it? It reinforces this idea that even when we're facing fear and uncertainty, there's strength in unity.
It does. It really
And
does.
it makes us think about those times in our own lives when we've been in similar situations, anxiously waiting for news that could change everything.
It's true. You really do hold your breath.
And it makes you appreciate those moments of togetherness even more.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even though this family's experience is unique in so many ways, the emotions they're dealing with, the fear, the hope, the love, those are universal. It's interesting, that the author doesn't give us any specifics about the actual medical crisis.
That is interesting.
It's almost like they want us to focus more on the emotional journey and less on the medical
Oh,
details.
that's a great point. By not giving us those specifics, it allows each of us as readers to connect with the story on a personal level. We can all relate to those feelings of helplessness and anxiety when someone we love is going through a health crisis.
Exactly. It becomes less about the specific illness and more about these universal emotions that connect us all.
Yeah, and it makes you think about the power of storytelling, doesn't it? How a single chapter can transport us to another time and place and allow us to see the world through someone else's eyes.
Absolutely. And this particular story, with its emphasis on family, resilience, and the weight of promises, it really gets you thinking about your own life, your relationships, and the things that truly matter.
It really does.
It does. It's funny, the whole time I was reading this, I kept trying to guess what that song could be.
I know, right?
It's like the author just left that mystery hanging there for us.
It really makes you think about those songs that have had a similar impact on your own life, doesn't it? Music is so powerful that way.
It really is. And this whole story takes place in the 90s,
Right.
which feels like both a lifetime ago and just yesterday.
Yeah.
Can you imagine trying to deal with a medical crisis in a foreign country without the internet?
It's mind-boggling, right?
No Google Translate, no online support groups, no way to quickly look up symptoms or treatment options.
The memoir mentions that they were relying a lot on phone calls back then,
Oh, yeah,
which would have been incredibly expensive.
definitely.
Plus, they had to put all their trust in the local doctors and the healthcare system there, which can be scary even in your own country.
Absolutely. It really makes you appreciate the company's decision to fly the siblings back to Brussels even more.
Well, for sure.
It wasn't just about getting them home, it was about providing that emotional support during such a difficult time.
Yeah, it really highlights how important family is in those situations.
It does. And the medical crisis itself is still kind of a mystery.
Right.
The author never actually tells us what the illness is or what the outcome was,
It's true.
which I think was intentional.
Yeah, it lets us focus more on the emotional and psychological impact of what's happening, rather than getting caught up in all the medical details.
Exactly. And by focusing on the family's internal experience, the author makes the story relatable to anyone who's ever faced a difficult situation.
Absolutely. It's a story about dealing with the unknown, about being resilient, and about the power of hope and love when things are tough.
It's a good reminder that even when things seem really dark, there's always a glimmer of hope.
That's a good way to put it.
And sometimes that hope comes from unexpected places, like a childhood pact made in the backseat of a car.
It makes you think about all the promises we make in our own lives, doesn't it? Both the ones we say out loud and the ones we keep to ourselves.
It does. What makes a promise really matter? How do they influence the choices we make and the relationships we have? And how do we keep those promises when life gets complicated? This whole deep dive has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
We started with this family moving abroad, then a medical crisis hits, and now we're reflecting on family dynamics, promises, and how these seemingly small moments can have such a huge impact on our lives.
It's amazing what a single chapter from a memoir can do, isn't it?
It really is. It makes you think about your own life and experiences.
It reminds us that even though everyone's story is different, the emotions we feel, the challenges we face, and the connections we make are universal.
It's true. And that brings us to the heart of this deep dive, those lingering questions, those thoughts that stick with you long after you finish reading. The author leaves us wondering what happened to the family, what happened with the medical crisis, and of course, what was that song that meant so much to the sisters?
That part about the song really got me thinking. It's like this secret door in the story, leading us to explore our own musical memories and the feelings they bring up.
Yeah.
What songs have that kind of power for you? You know, what melodies take you back to important moments in your life? What promises do those songs hold for you?
This deep dive has definitely made me see music in a whole new light. It's not just something to listen to, it's a way of communicating that speaks to our deepest
It
selves.
is. It's like a thread that connects us to our past, present, and future.
And sometimes it's the key to unlocking the most important promises we make to ourselves and to the people we love. It's amazing, isn't it? How these childhood promises, they might seem so small at the time, but they can really stick with you.
Yeah, it's like they capture what we valued back then, and
Yeah.
sometimes those values, they stay with us.
Right.
It's fascinating how something like a childhood pact can still be influencing our choices and relationships years later.
And you know what's interesting? These promises, they're not always spoken, are they?
You're right.
Sometimes they're just these unspoken understandings.
Like a shared experience that creates a bond that's just as strong as any written contract.
Exactly, like those secret clubs we had as kids.
Oh, yeah.
Or those unspoken agreements to always be there for each other.
Those can be even more powerful
Yeah.
because there's this deep level of trust and shared history.
It really shows you that promises, they're not just about words, are they?
No, no, no.
It's about actions, showing up for each other in big ways and small
And
ways.
sometimes I think the most important promises are the ones we make to ourselves.
Oh, that's a good point.
You know, promises to go after our dreams, to stand up for what we believe in, to
Yeah.
be the best versions of ourselves.
This has been quite a deep dive, hasn't it?
It really has.
I mean, we've gone from a family moving to a new country to a sudden medical crisis to thinking about family dynamics, promises, and how these little moments can have such a huge impact on our lives.
It really makes you wonder what childhood pacts or promises have shaped your own life.
It does. It really does. And it makes you think about the promises we're making right now, the ones that will shape our future and the future of those around us. As we wrap up our deep dive into this incredible story, it leaves me with this feeling of awe about how powerful human connection really is.
I know what you mean.
The memoir doesn't actually tell us what happened to the family or if the pact was ever fulfilled,
Right.
but it leaves you with this sense that the bond between the sisters, that connection they formed as kids and that was tested during this crisis, it helped them face the unknown.
And maybe that's the most important thing we can take away from this story.
Yeah.
That even when we're scared and unsure, the promises we make to ourselves and to each other, they can be like a guide,
Yeah.
leading us toward hope, resilience, and a deeper understanding of what really matters.
So as you go about your day today, we want you to think about those childhood pacts, those whispered promises, those unspoken bonds that have made you who you are today.
It's worth taking a moment to reflect on those things.
You might be surprised by what you discover.